Welcome to the Counselor's Chair, a podcast brought to you by Traverse Counseling Services. Join us as we explore all things human, mental health, psychology, philosophy, and a few extras. Be sure to check us out on all forms of social media and visit our YouTube channel at The Counselor's Chair. All right, everyone. Welcome back to The Counselor's Chair. We're super excited to tackle the Enneagram in this long-anticipated podcast with Wesley Nichols. Wes is a licensed marriage and family therapist with Traverse, and he's highly trained in both the Enneagram and EMDR therapy. As Andrew says, Wes has forgotten more about the Enneagram than we will ever remember, so if you're looking for a good resource, this is definitely it. Wes is also the owner and main coach with Enneagram Chattanooga, which serves individuals, couples, and businesses looking for ways to utilize the Enneagram for growth and change. So we hope you enjoy the episode as we explore the Enneagram history, types, ways to type yourself, and our own personal experiences with the Enneagram. All right, I'm here with Andrew and Wes. Wes, we're really excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for carving out some time to be here. We're super excited to hear what you had to say about the Enneagram and everything you're doing down in Chattanooga. So thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, no problem. Glad I could get to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, so the Enneagram has become very, very popular, and you've probably heard of it, whether it's in your work, in one of your friendships, at your church, maybe from your therapist, but it's coming from all types of angles now. And Wes is our in-house expert, and we're excited to hear what the Enneagram is all about. So Wes, let's kick this off with, what are you doing in Chattanooga now? You've started Enneagram Chattanooga. Will you tell us a little bit about what that is and what your aspirations and hopes for that are?
Yeah, so Enneagram Chattanooga, that's something I started this year, and it's really offering Enneagram services to individuals, couples, businesses, organizations, and really the public at large. Really kind of trying to serve this community by digging into the Enneagram and how this can be helpful in these different spaces.
Right on, man. So can you tell us a little bit about the types of people you're trying to reach, whether that's businesses, individuals, and how you meet with them? I think would be really good too. So yeah, definitely. So individuals and couples, kind of what I'm offering services for is one, kind of understanding the system in general and how this shows up in your life, and that self-awareness that can really be helpful in your relationships and personally. And then there's also kind of with some of these individual sessions a path forward for growth. What does it look like to use this tool to really grow? What are some of the goals you would have, and how can the Enneagram be helpful to get you to those? Kind of on the individual and couples realm for that one. For businesses and organizations, really, the Enneagram can be such a helpful tool to really help your team and help the people that you're working with better understand one another. Emotional intelligence is one of the big things that's kind of circulating in the workplaces these days, and the Enneagram speaks to that in a really incredible way. And so kind of the seminars and workshops I do with businesses can help bring that to life. That really brings your team together, and it also can help you guys work towards the common goal. And so then also, again, just for the community in general, I hold public events that can help people learn more about the Enneagram, but really more than that, it's learn more about themselves. How can I better understand why I do the things that I do? How can I better understand my spouse, my friends, the people I work with, and use this tool to really bring about true and authentic growth and connection? So those are kind of the spaces that I'm really trying to use Enneagram Chattanooga to serve. Well, that's awesome, man. It's definitely really needed in the community, especially for that emotional intelligence piece, whether it's in relationships, whether that's, in your workplace, or even in churches as well. I know it's kind of popular amongst the religious communities, right? I think it has some origins there, which you're going to talk about. So that's awesome, man. How would people get a hold of you to either schedule an appointment or to plug into your services?
Yeah, definitely. So you can go to enneagramchattanooga.com. That's my website. It talks a little bit about the different services I offer, as well as kind of a recap of the Enneagram in general. I have some kind of a resource that people can use that helps you maybe figure out your type. It's kind of a free resource that's offered. And then you can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Enneagram Chat. And again, those are kind of resources that give further information about types in general, about how to figure out your type. I know there's some upcoming series about kind of the focus of attention for each of the types. So basically, what does each type focus on, and how this awareness, right, can be helpful in trying to learn what it means to grow.
Oh, cool, man. So if you guys are interested, which I highly recommend that you check it out. Again, Wes is really schooled on this stuff, and I think you're going to figure that out as we move through this podcast. So we're going to hopefully hit on what the Enneagram actually is, how it can be useful both personally, professionally. Wes is going to give us a pretty cool overview of each type, maybe talk a little bit about how you would go about finding your type. And then we're also going to talk about our personal experiences with it, which I think will be really, really valuable. So, Wes, so tell us, what is the Enneagram?
Yeah. That's a good place to start. So on a really basic level, the Enneagram is a personality typing system based on an ancient symbol and the idea of there being 9 basic personality types. Now, the kind of the depth to this system, it's so much more than just that, but at a very basic level, that's what it is. And really, for me to be a place where I've found Enneagram Chattanooga, and where I'm kind of offering these services to people, there has to be something that really drew me in and really showed me this is something that's worth kind of sharing. And for me, a big part of that was the Enneagram gets at the why. It gets at why we do the things that we do. And that is just such an important component when it comes to being aware of ourselves and really trying to grow. I know some people who don't really care for personality stuff because it feels like it puts them in a box. It feels like it kind of confines them in a way, or it feels like it's just confirming things that they already know. Like, well, yeah, I mean, you're just listing out these behavioral characteristics I already know about myself. Like, okay, that's cool, but how is that really helpful? And really, for the Enneagram, it's neither one of those, because this is getting to the motivations and the internal drives. This isn't based on behavioral descriptions, but again, the why. And what that looks like is we all have patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. These are kind of our default reactions to the world around us. And so what the Enneagram provides is an internal map of what those things are. What are kind of these things that define us, and how can we not be defined by these? A lot of these things are kind of unconscious. We're not even aware of them. We're just reacting to the world around us. And so what the Enneagram provides is a map to understand that and to kind of bring some freedom from those things. And so what happens is we oftentimes become defined and identified with these. Well, this is just kind of how I am. This is who I am. I just kind of react this way. This is just kind of part of me. And what the Enneagram really wants to say is that our default responses, our default reactions, we're so much more than that. And so as we can shed light on these things, we can open up the opportunity for us to not live reactively out of these patterns. We open up the chance for deeper growth and change. And so, we talked about putting people in a box. Really what the Enneagram does instead is it shows you the box you're already in and how to get out. And that message right there is so much maybe more freeing for people than this idea of, okay, I'm going to be kind of constricted by this type. And so the Enneagram is a powerful tool to kind of map our internal world and show us how to get out, right? How to grow in a sense. And there's a clear direction for that.
Well, it's cool that you say that too, this idea of the box that we're in and kind of the box that we want to break out of too, right? I was recently reading an article on the Myers-Briggs, actually, and it's a fine test. It's been around for a long time, another personality test. But this article actually outlined and walked with 4 different people who believe their life was ruined by that personality test, particularly because of what you were talking about, this phenomenon of being stuffed in a box or being like, oh, this is what you are, and that's how they did it at work. And so all of their colleagues wind up seeing them in that box. They feel like they're trapped in the box, or like they've been lying about other aspects of their personality because, like, oh man, like I'm solely this. So to hear you say like the Enneagram is meant to be expansive and grow your life versus columnize and categorize you. That's really cool. That's really cool, man. I'm glad. I'm glad that it has that outcome rather than the categorizing or stuffing somebody in a box outcome. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I hear that stuff like what you just shared like all the time. It's a big turnoff, right? If people are kind of, because it's easy, I guess, to hear some of these descriptions or hear some of these types and be like, oh, okay, well, I've got you pegged, right? Like I got you down. That's how you are, and that's how you're always going to be. And that doesn't feel good to anybody, right? No. And so it really can be helpful to see that this system allows you to live into the strengths and the gifts that each of these types has, but then also become aware of, okay, here are some of the struggles, here are some of the challenges, and maybe here are ways to try to minimize how much that's showing up. And I think what's important with this kind of growth piece is we're maybe not going to ever get rid of the default kind of instinct to respond in a certain way, to react in a certain way. But what we can really begin to develop is the ability when that comes up to pause, to take a breath and choose how you want to respond, as opposed to just reacting out of these default patterns. And that's really so much of what we want to get at when it comes to this growth piece.
Got you. So how do you go about helping somebody create that pause, right? Because it sounds like when we're talking about how to use this to grow personally, relationally, like that pause seems like it's a really, really important part of using the Enneagram as a tool.
Yeah, no, that the pause I think is essential, quite honestly, because kind of how I like to think about it sometimes is we go on autopilot. So often in our lives, we're just on autopilot and we're just, again, living our life and just kind of reacting to the world around us, and we're not truly really present to ourselves and our internal world and what's happening. We're just kind of reacting to whatever is going around us in our default patterns. And so really what I think can bring a bit of presence, a bit of mindfulness, is being able to stop and take a breath. It's almost kind of like a reset that kind of allows us to zoom out and to kind of look at ourselves and see what's actually going on, as opposed to the interpretation that we kind of project onto our environment instinctually. And so really developing that pause is super important. Now, I'll be honest with you. This isn't like hey, I've shared now, you need to take a breath, and now you can just easily do it. By no means is that it. And I think it's a process. One, kind of this growth process, I think, looks like developing awareness of what these patterns are. So that's like, okay, what are internally some of the things that I default to? What are some of these negative patterns that I fall into and the things I struggle with? And as I become overall more aware of what those are, it opens up possibility for me to begin to notice when those things are showing up. And a lot of times with people I'm working with, and even for myself, what I find is when you're beginning to kind of work towards these change, I don't notice it in the moment. It's a day later, right? It's maybe 2 or 3 days later, and I look back and I'm like, oh man, I totally missed it, right? Like I totally reacted out of these patterns as opposed to really what's truly connected to myself and what I truly value and want. But it was more just kind of what came out of me in the moment. But the more that we kind of have this awareness, coupled with a very important piece too, and this is kind of, I think, taking a page out of the mindfulness playbook, with some of the self-compassion and curiosity, we can kind of recognize that these patterns have actually helped us grow, that we've needed kind of some of these patterns, even some of the negative aspects, they've helped us in some way. If we can recognize that and offer some compassion to ourselves, it opens up the possibility to not be defined by that. So it's kind of overall awareness of our patterns, and then kind of the self-compassion. And the next thing is kind of, to your point, it's being able to catch ourselves in the act. And that's a progression. I see it's 3 or 4 days, and then it's 1 day, and then maybe it's like 8 to 10 hours later, then it's like 3 or 4, then it's an hour, and then it's like being able to, in real time, being able to catch ourselves, right? And being able to kind of reroute our responses. And again, I can't stress enough, this is really difficult work. This is not something that is just, you snap your fingers and do. But it is so worth it when it allows you to be present to yourself and the people around you.
I mean, you're breaking psychological patterns formed over maybe even decades by the time somebody has encountered the Enneagram, right?
Exactly. It's those neural pathways, right? Like these are so ingrained, right? And we're trying to rewrite those. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating stuff, man. And the mindfulness piece sounds really, really pertinent. It's that progression. Like, we practice a lot of mindfulness. One of the things I always struggle with mindfulness is, okay, so and I know it's kind of not the point of mindfulness, but my brain automatically goes here once I've been mindful and I'm noticing things. It's like, okay, so what do I do with this? What do I do with this newfound mindfulness knowledge, right? And so, I mean, it sounds like the Enneagram would be an excellent tool to sort of plug into that open space, especially if you're already practicing mindfulness on a daily basis, or that's something you really try and stay attuned to. I don't know. Andrew, as a sort of resident mindfulness expert over here, how's this stuff sitting with you?
Yeah, so the way you describe that, it kind of makes me think a little bit about it's kind of like a bicep curl for the brain. Like, it's almost like, because it's repetition, right? So you're almost training like an untrained mind, just kind of stuck at the behest of your own impulses and drives over, like you said, decades of experience. The way that we've got our attachment needs met or not met, or how trauma affects us, basically, even kind of like how we were talking about earlier today, just things that happened in the past that basically creates our personality, but also affects our where we're at presently. Mm-hmm. But then also we can get overwhelmed and all the agenda and the expectations and all the social roles that we have, and it completely robs us of being in the present moment. So therefore, robbing us of, just kind of having control and, being able to pick up those little idiosyncrasies that sometimes negatively affect our relationships and our decisions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love like you said, the bicep analogy. And that's definitely something I kind of use a lot as well. It's like a muscle, right? Like this, it takes practice, right? Like this isn't just something that you just kind of learn and then it changes everything. It's something you have to be intentional about, continuing to be mindful of, kind of to your point. So yeah, I think that's spot on.
Nice. Well, I'd love to ask this question. I'm sure, unless you have more to add to this, but there's 9 types. Right. And like you said, these types aren't really meant to be restrictive or all purposely defining, I guess would be a good way of saying that. Could you walk us through the types, Wes? Like, general overview of the 9, what to maybe look for, and if you want to add something to, like, to make our listeners aware of how to actually hear what you're saying right now too, if they've never taken a test or talked to a professional about their type, maybe you could give a brief little introduction as far as like how to take in the information that you're about to give about the types if they're wondering what they may be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think I would want to just take a second too, is because I definitely highlighted an important part of the Enneagram kind of in general as far as us being aware of ourselves and being able to grow. But I would be at fault to not also mention this doesn't just help us individually and personally grow, but this is such an incredible tool in our relationships as well. Yeah. And really what this is, it's developing understanding and empathy with the people in our lives. Because it's one thing when I can understand myself and what's going on and live out of that place. It's another when we're encountering people all the time. I don't know about you guys, but like there are people in my life, I won't name names, right? But who drive me up a wall, right? There's certain things they do, names certain things they say. Okay, it's coming, right? But they do, like they grate on us. Yeah. And a lot of times it can be hard for us to figure out what exactly is going on. What is this? And really how I see the Enneagram is it can begin to show us a little bit of like what's actually going on, right? Mm-hmm. What are maybe some of the fears and insecurities underneath this behavior that can help us have a little bit more empathy? Now, is this going to maybe change how they respond, or even maybe our own kind of gears being grinded by these people? Maybe not, right? Mm-hmm. But if we can have an understanding, it can allow us to be able to, in the moment, maybe respond a little bit differently. Yeah. There's no way we can control anyone or their own responses or even how their reactions, but I often find, I mean, this happens all the time, right? The way we respond to people a lot of times can perpetuate certain responses. It can perpetuate certain behaviors or things that maybe don't sit well with us. Yes. But if we can, again, zoom out and see, oh, maybe I'm actually doing this thing or saying this thing that's pushing a button for them. Mm-hmm. And maybe if I just kind of tweak this a bit, maybe I'm going to get a completely different reaction that could actually open up possibilities for a new type of relationship. Sure. And that's just something that is so valuable in the workplace. Mm-hmm. That's something that's valuable at home, in our families, and with our friendships, and in the community. Like, that piece right there of that understanding and being able to move in with empathy is something the Enneagram can totally shed light on. that opens up so much.
In that circumstance, right, you have the coworker who's grating on your nerves. Hopefully that's not happening in our workplace, but if it is,
we're good.
We're good. About it. But I if you have that coworker who's sort of grating on the nerves, would they need to know their type? Is that something that you would need to know how to shift how to approach them or how to be talking to them? Or, will your own knowledge of what your type typically bends to enlighten you in that manner, or is it better for your community as a whole to be using the tool or at least be familiar with it?
Yeah, I think it's both, right? Okay. So if we're aware of ourselves and our own patterns, that's going to show us maybe what are some of the things in us that are coming out that we don't necessarily realize that is kind of impacting people negatively. So again, we can almost take ownership of some of the mess that we're showing, maybe unintentionally or not even realizing it. So that's the one facet of it. But then also knowing the Enneagram type of the other person is a really important piece that can open up a lot. And even with some of the workshops that I do with teams, the first kind of a basic package that I offer is coming in and doing a workshop that it kind of dives into identifying the types of everybody in that space and helping them understand themselves and what's going on so you can have that understanding and empathy. And then I typically kind of follow that up with another workshop that talks about, okay, how do we use this now? And we get into communication skills. We get into conflict management. Like, how can we actually practically learn how to communicate and address certain things knowing this valuable knowledge that we have? It really is incredible. And just understanding all of this and other people in other type is one thing, but having the practical tools as well can take this to another level. Oh. So I think... to your point, it can be both. But if the other person knows their type and they for sure know theirs as well, again, it can open up so much.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, and I'm sure you're going to get into this, and I'm interested how this plays out. But that whole health stress dynamic, right? It impacts how people enact their type, right? And so I'm definitely interested. If it is a good time, jumping into the types, what they bend to, what they lean to, maybe what they run away from, right? I know you have a bunch of awesome stuff to say on this, so man, unleash it.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to we don't have like a ton of time, so I can't do a deep dive into each of these, so I'm going to kind of hit the highlights of this. But, I do get a question a lot, how do you figure out your type? And so I just want to kind of put some tips out there to kind of keep in mind as you're listening to this, but also as you kind of take this further on, whether you're reading, listening to podcasts, going to workshops, whatever it is, just kind of keep these things in mind when you're trying to figure out your type. And the first thing is, it's okay if you don't know right away. If you don't know what type you are at the end of this podcast, that's totally okay. It's a process, and that's an okay piece. Other thing I want to highlight is that tests can be helpful. They really can be helpful to kind of put you in the right direction of like maybe these potential types are what could resonate most with me, but they are not definitive. No test is going to tell you for sure what you are. And so keeping that in mind is going to be really helpful. As well as no one can tell you 100% what type you are either, right? So even experts can give you advice. They can give you valuable feedback on like trying to identify what type you are. But at the end of the day, this has to be your own journey in trying to figure out what that is, because it's you taking ownership of that. And at the end of the day, we have to take ownership of ourselves, of our own understanding and awareness, and also the way that we're going to react and respond to the people around us.
Yeah, Wes actually helped me figure out my type, right? We took a test first, and it was like, well, question mark, right? There were a couple we were considering. We kind of landed, I think, originally on a 4, I think is what it was.
That's one that we had talked about.
And so I was reading through it, and I was like, man, there's a lot of this that I'm not connecting with. And Wes was just like, man, you know what? Like, the test is useful, but also my results came back, I think, on a really oddly even playing field.
It's like pretty much almost across the board.
Yeah, so I think it was you or Andrew who lent me the wisdom of the Enneagram book. Is it the ancient wisdom of the Enneagram?
The wisdom of the Enneagram.
Just the wisdom of the Enneagram book, and I was reading through that and hit the 7, and I read it and just started laughing. Right, it connected. It connected so much with me, but I think I'm a perfect example of what you just said, which is like a test was helpful, but after some conversations with you and then reading through the book, it became a little more obvious to me what what type I associated with, right?
Yes, honestly, I feel like what you just said is almost there isn't a model for figuring out your type, but I think what you just highlighted is a way a lot of people do it, right? Mm-hmm. They maybe take a test, they get kind of an introduction, but then they have to dig in themselves. They have to put in some of the time and the work to kind of read through or to listen and trying to figure it out, as well as observing themselves, right? Because that's an important piece. You can learn all about the Enneagram, but if you're not paying attention to yourself and how these things are showing up, this isn't going to be helpful, right? It can be cool, and this. I feel like parts of the Enneagram are becoming almost kind of pop psychology. But for this to be a true tool for transformation, growth, this has to be something that is turning our sights inward, that allows us to kind of notice these things. So really doing the digging work afterwards, that's a key component of this. And to kind of what I'm going to talk about kind of today, this isn't anything final, right? Like, go on beyond this and try to learn more and try to sort these things out. So, yeah.
Nice, man. Well, so fill us in on a 1.
Yeah, for sure. So there's different names for each of these types. And so I'm going to kind of, use one kind of label or name for it. And for type 1, that's the reformer. And so kind of how I'm going to go through these is highlight, 1, the core fear. Every type has a kind of a core fear that's embedded in them. And then what happens is they develop a coping belief. They develop this kind of belief that if I do this, I'm going to be okay. Or if I do this, they're going to be all right. And so we find for the type 1 that the core fear is being ultimately bad or corrupt. And so they then develop a coping belief that to be good, I must do things the right way. And that's kind of air quotes. And I think this is actually a misconception for ones that I'll kind of, I guess, get to. But ones are very principled, they're conscientious, they are very typically upstanding characters. It's very important for them to, again, do things the right way. They have a very high standard within themselves that they are kind of shooting towards and want to live into. And for them, quality is everything. It's about the things need to be quality and done rightly. It's no cutting corners, no kind of just trying to get by. I need to make sure I'm doing it just as it needs to be. So kind of with this, as you can imagine, if there's such a strong ethic of making sure they're doing things the right way, at times they can be a little hard on themselves, right? This is something that is so important to them, and when they feel like they're not living up to their own standard, their own kind of view of what is right and how it should be done, they can be harsh on themselves. But not only that, at times then it can also get projected out into the world around them. So it can be one of those things of like, ooh, like, why can't people just do what they're supposed to do, right? Like, why can't they just live up to whatever it is, the responsibilities they have, whatever it is almost kind of righteous indignation.
Yes.
That's something that can show up pretty common for ones, this kind of frustration at the world around them not being as it should be. These ones, they really can be such incredible teachers because of their ability to kind of truly feel the rightness and communicate that. And wise and moral, those are things that a lot of times come up. We do find that every type kind of has a vice. They have something that is more of a struggle. This kind of comes from the history. We find that there is a Vagrius Ponticus, who's a Christian monastic. He kind of in his writings, he talks about this idea of there being vices. This idea of there being these struggles that every person has. And he kind of sketches out in his writings 8 to 10, depending on what you're reading of his. And he kind of theorizes that we have all of these, but maybe there's one that we identify with more than the rest. And so kind of taking this idea, there's almost 8 to 10 types of people, and kind of the idea of there being personality types, kind of you can trace it back to kind of this idea that he kind of sketched. And then we see the 7 deadly sins and kind of the Christian tradition is kind of birthed out of that. So when we look at vices, every type has a vice per se. And so for the one, we find that vice is anger. And this is typically something that for ones is kind of like okay, maybe I can maybe see this. It doesn't maybe immediately resonate, but we find that for ones, it's really a repressed anger. It's a controlled anger. Because we find that this anger is again deep down at the injustice in the world. It's deep down at this anger at the world not being as it should be, and it almost propels them forward to doing and living their life in a way that is matching the quality that they believe it should be. Sure. And so there's this anger that's deep down. But when we kind of take a look at this coping belief to be good, I must do things the right way, we find that anger at times, when it comes up and it's kind of let loose, at times it can be scary, right? Mm-hmm. It can cause us to do and react in ways that hurt the people around us, or react in ways that don't reflect good on us as people. And so for ones, they almost kind of internally, they recognize this. And so the way they deal with this anger is, I'm going to control this, right? I'm not going to let this come out. I'm just going to kind of sit on it. And we actually find a lot of ones, they don't get angry. No, they get frustrated. They get irritated. Anger? No, I don't get angry. That's kind of something that maybe ones can kind of talk about. Because again, they see the threat that anger could pose, or at least that's how they perceive it. Sure. And so for the one, the vice is kind of this anger. But at their healthiest, ones are people who are able to kind of see what the world should be and move towards really reforming it in a way that makes it so much better and truer to this kind of perfection that they seek.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Nice,
man. Well, and before you scoot on through the other ones, I won't interrupt you. You feel free to just flow right through them, right? And I the way I understand the Enneagram is there's sort of almost like a health scale of sorts, right? So when you're stressed, you go in one direction. When you're healthy, am I using the right? If I'm not using the right words, please correct it after I'm done speaking. But like I understand it as, certain thought patterns and behaviors and ways of seeing the world around you start to emerge the more stressed and anxious you become. But then the healthier and less stressed you become, those things start to shift as well in the other direction. Do I understand that right? As you're moving through these types, maybe that's a good framework for people to understand.
Yeah. So you're actually hitting on something that's actually become I don't know if controversial is the right word, but there is maybe a shifting in the Enneagram community. So for those of you who are familiar with the Enneagram and the Enneagram symbol itself, you'll see that there's these lines that kind of go from number to number. And it sounds like kind of what you're talking about is every type has a connection via these lines to two other types. And a lot of Enneagram kind of literature, we found it talked about like, if you're in stress, you'll move towards this other number and kind of temporarily take on some of these motivations or kind of drives or characteristics for a time, and then you always kind of come back home per se to your main type. Right. And then they've described it, there's another number you're connected to that when you're kind of more relaxed and more kind of at ease, or you're more healthy, you move towards that number and take on some of the positive characteristics. We're finding a shift though, that's kind of, I feel like a much more kind of holistic approach, and really how the teachers now and the people who are really kind of diving into the Enneagram are talking about it is there's two lines of these two types, and depending on where you're at overall, kind of if we're talking about health, you take on the positives and negatives of both. So for example, let's just say you are a 9, and there is this connection to type 3 and type 6. If you're in an unhealthy place overall in your life, guess what?
Take on all 3.
Yes, exactly. You're going to be showing up some of the unhealthy qualities of the 3, and you're going to show up some of the unhealthy qualities of the 6. Like, it's just going to kind of happen. Yes. Because a lot of times these movements to these numbers are things that unconsciously we just kind of do, and we take on some of these characteristics before kind of coming back. Okay. On the opposite end, though, we find that if you're in a more healthy and aware place, these numbers are kind of resource points for us. We can kind of almost intentionally lean into those numbers and take on some of those good characteristics, some of the strengths and good qualities that show up for both of those. I think in the way that it's kind of been talked about in the past, what can tend to happen is people feel like, well, there's this one number that's good that I want to move towards, and there's this one number that's like bad that I want to stay away from. Sure. And it's kind of, I guess it's helpful because it's like, ooh, like there's a bad one and a good one, and I just want to stay away. But I think it's just way more complex than that. Yeah. And I think the more you dive in, the more you begin to see those layers. So yeah.
I could definitely see that personally. I think the 7, what is it, a 1 and a 5, I think is the 7s. And so, yeah, that's a really interesting way to paint that, because I feel like that when I'm healthy, I feel like I embody characteristics of health from both of those numbers, actually, because sometimes I'll feel really healthy and kind of snap into a 1, and I'm like, wait, am I actually stressed? Like, Am I misjudging this right now? Is my inner 7 running away from some pain that I'm not even aware of? But anyway, yeah, that's super helpful. So yeah, man, walk us through the rest of the types. That'd be super helpful.
Yeah, sure thing. So moving on, we're going to go to type 2, and this is kind of the name we're going to use for this is the helper. They have a core fear of being unloved or unwanted, and then they develop a coping belief that to be loved, you must give to others. So 2s are compassionate, they are warm-hearted, they are very relationship-oriented, and they care so much about the people in their lives and the relationships around them. And they devote a lot of time towards really caring for these needs. And we find that there is just an attunement they have to the needs of those around them. They can just kind of almost sense like, ooh, okay, maybe this is what's needed right here, and they're going to move in and meet that need. Mm-hmm. It's such a gift to the people around them. We do find, though, that with this kind of gift and this kind of focus on other people, that over time, this can begin to really wear the 2 out. Mm-hmm. They're spending so much of their time, so much of their effort being focused on others that at the end of the day, feelings of resentment maybe can build when they look around and they're like, well, why isn't anyone taking care of me? Mm-hmm. And this is not something that's really easy for 2s to do, which is kind of maybe ask for help or tell people what they need, because there is this kind of identity in I'm the one who's helping. And so it can be a real struggle as they're kind of self-care can be something really hard for 2s to really begin to embody. But there is this kind of like very warm-hearted, sensitive people who just want to kind of care for the people around them. We do find, if we're looking at kind of the vice for this type and what kind of shows up and can be a struggle for them, we find the vice is pride. And this can show up in a couple ways. One, kind of already how I've kind of highlighted, is this almost like, well, I'm the one who helps, and so I don't need any help. I'm fine. I'm okay. Kind of this kind of pride in their own, not needing anything from other people. Which, when you dig deeper, you realize that they are desperately wanting people to help. It's just hard for them to communicate that. The other piece to this pride, too, is almost a pride in their own goodness, right? Man, I help, I give to all these people. Almost kind of this sense of pride in their own goodness is another way this kind of pride can show up. But again, at their healthiest, 2s really do embody this kind of selfless service that really wants to carry the load and to really serve and love people well. And these warm-hearted people that really focus on building relationships with other people.
Nice. Yeah. That's good stuff, man. That part about 2s actually wanting help, I feel like that's a really important part. If you are a 2 out there, to hear, right, is like the desire for help is actually in you. It might be good to pay attention so your relationships could be a little more reciprocal, right? Yeah, that would be a good thing.
No, for sure. That's spot on. And so, I mean, we talk about a lot of these are the natural kind of reactions that come up. Yeah. So the initial reaction that might come up is like, no, I'm fine. I can't share this thing. Or I can't do this. That's kind of, if we're thinking about these default reactions, that's the default kind of reaction that 2 has. And what we would want to do, like you said, is let's stay present to that. Yeah. Let's stay present to that impulse and be like, wait a minute, like, is that actually true, right? Is that, do I actually really not need or want any help? Like, can I take a risk and maybe ask for what I need? Those are some of the questions that the 2 can really begin to kind of meditate on, and it can open up so much.
Nice. So what about 3s, man?
Yeah, for the 3.
Yeah, the achiever, huh?
Yes. So for 3s, the achiever. For this type, we find there's a core fear of being a failure or not good enough. And they then have a coping belief that to have value, you must be constantly doing and achieving. So we find for 3s, these are typically goal-oriented, efficient, energetic, always kind of pushing towards some type of task or goal that they've kind of set out. A lot of times they are hard workers that really kind of focus in on what they're trying to work towards, and a lot of times they really work hard to make those things happen. We find that with this type, there also can be an image consciousness of the perceptions of other people. And so for them, there is this desire to kind of, at times, without realizing it, maybe kind of shift presentation a bit. Kind of, I'm going to show maybe this good side and maybe not kind of show these other things because they're wanting to get a good response from the people around them. This isn't something they're consciously doing, but for the 3, there is this desire to bring value and to make a good impression on the people around them, which allows them to do and achieve so much, but can at times make them become disconnected from themselves. When you peel back the doing, when you peel back all the stuff that they're pushing towards who are they outside of the doing and the striving? And that can be something that threes at times can become disconnected from and not even know. Which then leads us to the vice for this type, and it's deceit. And what I really want to highlight with this deceit is, I think at the most basic level, this deceit is a self-deceit. It's a deceiving themselves that they are what they do, that they are the image that they project onto the world, and that there isn't anything other than that.
Yeah, that's what I was actually wondering that, because like if you're really work oriented, you're achieving, you're doing all of these things, but you're also shifting your presentation, not really in touch with the core self, you're gonna associate everything you do with who you are, right? It's like you become your actions, and there's like no core inner working or firing going on there, right?
Yes, no, that's exactly it. It then becomes almost a slave to the doing, right? I have to continue to do. I have to continue to perform or achieve in order for me to have worth or value. That's kind of the message that's internalized, right? To have value, you must be constantly doing and achieving. If you're not doing that, what's left? And so we find this self-deceit kind of takes them out of touch with who they are and their own internal core value. Yes. Regardless of whether any type 3 is doing or achieving, there is value there. And so really the self-deceit is them not realizing that. And at times it also can be deceiving of others as well. If there is a need to impress, if there is a need to achieve, there can be, tweaks and modifications and exaggerations that kind of make a good impression. And so for the 3, what they have to really begin to do is recognize that, wait a minute, there is that value internal. Let me take time to maybe not engage so much in the doing, and let me take time to really get in touch with who I am, right? Like what I'm actually feeling, what I'm actually want, like those things, as opposed to this kind of assembly line of production. And so that's kind of the vice that shows up for them. But at their healthiest, they are getting in touch with their heart. They are getting in touch with their feelings and what's going on, and they're living from this authentic place that allows them to stay connected while also still living into this achieving and trying to bring forth the value to the people around them. The value is so important for 3s because they want that value to be given to other people and lived into in a great way. And in their healthy place, they're doing that while also being authentic to themselves. That's a little bit of kind of about the type 3.
Yeah, to be authentic and that high of a performer. I mean, I could imagine a healthy 3 is putting out some really quality material, whether that's in the workplace or in relationships. I mean, that's a heck of a combination. Like almost like the healthy achiever could be like what is it, the mindful achiever, or the in touch or authentic achiever, right? Yeah. But anyway, okay, good stuff, Wes. What about 4? I think the individualist.
Yes, you're nailing them. So type 4, the individualist. There's a core fear of being ultimately deficient, flawed, or abandoned, which then leads to this kind of coping belief that to have worth, you must find deep connection or what's missing. So we find with type 4s, these people are intuitive, they are emotionally deep, they feel things very deeply, and they have an eye for the beauty around them. They're able to kind of see like kind of what's missing and maybe what could be added that would bring forth beauty and life, and they really want to get to the depths of things. They want to find depth and connection to themselves, but also to other people and to what they're engaging in life. This kind of is something that wells up in them and they want to move towards in a way, and they bring this authenticity of themselves and trying to develop that also in the world around them. We find with them, they're also with this kind of authenticity and a search for what's missing, though, there can almost be this melancholy. There can be this kind of feeling of like a sweet sadness in a sense, because we find with this type, there's also typically a feeling of longing, a feeling of like, there's something that's missing that if I could just figure out or find what that is, I feel like I would be okay. I feel like I would be complete.
Yes.
Which then kind of leads us a little bit to what the vice is for this type, and that's envy. And so really what this envy looks like is this longing. It's this feeling of what I have or who I am right now, there's something missing, and it's out there somewhere. And if I could just find what it is, right? Or if I could just get back to what I had, or if I could just have that quality, or if I could just have that. Why is it so easy for everyone else? Why can't that be my experience? These are kind of sentiments that can kind of come up for the 4 that disconnects them from themselves. And the fact that even in the ordinary, even in the mundane day-to-day, there's wholeness, and there is an ability to have value and to have worth, and that there isn't anything missing. Mm-hmm. There isn't something outside of themselves that if they can just kind of find that it's going to be okay, and this can drive them to constantly seeking for something else. But when a 4 is becoming aware of this envy and this longing, they're able in a healthy way embody this in a way that gets them connected to themselves and allows the waves of emotion that come up for this type to come up and to pass. That's really what we find with 4s is they feel things so deeply and intensely. And I want to take a pause and say there can be a misconception with 4s that 4s are these people who are just like feeling all over the place, right? They're just like spilling their feelings everywhere. That some 4s, yes, there are tons of 4s though who everything I'm talking about right now is an internal state. It's something that's happening inside of them that you would not know from the outside. And so I can't stress that enough, because I know plenty of people who maybe are 4s who just feel like, oh, a lot of these descriptions or a lot of the ways that people describe it, that's not me because I don't let these things out.
Right.
But really, when they're able to kind of to live into this in a healthy way, they're able to realize that there's not something special or great out there that I need to seek after. Even in the mundane and the ordinary and the day-to-day, there is an ability to be content and to be whole and things to be okay.
Yeah.
And so at their healthiest, they're able to live authentically out of that place, out of their kind of true selves as opposed to the waves of the emotion, and bring so much depth and beauty to the people around them.
Wow. Yeah, I'm so glad that you hit on the positive aspects of the 4. Like, it seems like a lot of the literature is kind of hard on the 4, right? Or at least hard to read, right? It's like, oh, like it talks a lot about victimhood or being a victim or the unfairness and like those types of things that emerge. But I think it's really good that you decided to be even keel with that, right? Present the downside of it, but also I know 4s who are attuned and don't slide into that victimhood mentality very frequently, and if they do, they're kind of noticing that stuff and trying to move out of it. So I don't know, I've worked with people in therapy who are like, and I typed 4 on the Enneagram, and I'm like the worst person ever. I'm like, no, like, no, it's okay. Like, I know it sounds so bad, but you know, but it's not. It's maybe not as bad as the language makes it sound, right? So it's good to hear you balance that a bit, Wes.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there are a few types that I think a lot of times can get stereotyped in a way that makes it feel like, oh, there's all these negative and bad qualities.
Right.
And from my kind of work with the Enneagram and even my training, I'm trained in the narrative Enneagram, which focuses on story, focuses on how are these things showing up like in the stories in the lives of people. I've met so many 4s who I hear their stories or I hear what's going on internally for them, and you see this depth and beauty and also you see it not just for the 4 but for all of the types. And I know for me, my view and perception of each of these types, hearing the stories of people has made me recognize like so much of the gifts and the beauty that each of them have and have to offer. And if anything, what I want to do is to really put that on display, and for everybody, whatever type you are, for you to feel kind of that being seen and known in a way that highlights these strengths and gifts you have to offer, while also recognizing, but there are these struggles, right? This kind of balanced view, like we don't want to, negate that there are things that we all struggle with, right? But those aren't the things that define us. There are these kind of like really true gifts that we have to offer, and I really want to kind of highlight those. So yeah, that's an intentional thing. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you did that, and super interested to hear about the 5. Right, like that's one of the ones that I'll bend to at times, and I'm always intrigued by my own behavior and actions and thought patterns when I'm there. But I'm pumped to hear you talk about the 5. Is it I'm going to see if I can go 5 for 5.
Let's see. You ready?
Investigator?
Yes, you got it. Yes.
Hey.
Did some reading.
I know. Huh?
He did his homework. That's what it was, right?
It's like those fish oils are helping the old brain retain stuff. It's actually working.
So the type 5, the investigator. We find that the core fear for this type is being incompetent and intruded upon. And then they have a coping belief that to survive, you must conserve yourself and gather knowledge. So we find with the type 5, they are perceptive and curious, insightful, objective. These are people who kind of take the world in, kind of observe everything, and they really want to kind of take it all in and almost kind of mine it. They don't want to kind of, they're not reactive people. They're not people who are kind of hot and cold. They're people who are going to be very thoughtful and mindful with any decisions that they make. And they're going to make sure that it matches up with kind of their own digging and trying to figure out what's going on. Because we find this need to understand. We find this need to, it's not okay for me to just know an answer. I need to know the why, right? I want to figure out what's going on, the nuts and bolts of it. And this kind of drives them in a way. We find that because all of these things are so important to them, they live a lot of their life in their head, right? There's a lot of mental activity going on. And for them, I've heard 5 describe kind of like finding an idea or finding something that they're really interested in, and they just do a deep dive, and they will just like research and mine it. And there's just almost this joyous part of them that comes alive in this digging. And it's really cool to hear them, to hear them share that and see them kind of come alive in a way.
Yeah.
We find, though, with this, if you're living so much life in your mind, that it can be a little bit difficult to step out, right? And so that's one of the things that can be a little bit more difficult for the 5 is to get out of their heads and to begin to take action, to take steps, to begin to share what's going on internally with them. Because we also find that not only is this desire to gather knowledge and to understand, but there also is this feeling of, I have a limited supply. I have a limited supply of energy. I have a limited supply of time. I have a limited supply of everything, kind of this almost scarcity mentality. And so for them, we find that the vice that shows up is avarice. And what avarice is kind of this tendency to, I'm going to kind of hoard myself. I'm not going to be almost a stinginess with myself. I'm not going to be very free with my time or free with my energy. I'm going to be very close to the vest with my feelings or what's going on. Like, I'm going to kind of keep this close because I feel like I have a limited supply and I can't spend it all at once, right? And so the vice that shows up can cause them to kind of isolate at times and withdraw and not share as freely with other people. And so this avarice can cause them to kind of withdraw from other people and from the world at large at times. We find, though, that when they're moving into a healthy space, what they're able to do is take this vast knowledge and understanding that they've been able to move into, and they're able to take action. They're able to step out. They're able to share themselves, to recognize that there isn't necessarily a limited supply. They can give themselves, and it will be okay, and add so much value around them as they offer these insights and clarity into the world.
So what was it? Avarice.
I
didn't know that word.
Yeah, that's a new one. Avarice. Like, I wonder if Einstein would have like existed in avarice. Like, what what would have happened, right? Obviously, I mean, he had to have some sort of 5-ish sort of tendency,
for
right?
sure.
So, but I guess maybe he used a form of, because he was a playful guy, right? Like, you see him in I don't even know if there's interviews. I feel like I've heard interviews. Maybe there's recordings of him. I don't know. Or maybe I've just seen pictures with him sticking his tongue out. Like,
that's true.
You know what I mean? Like,
on a bicycle.
Yeah, there was some. I feel like I've read recently some of Einstein stuff and thought he's like really playful with his language. So I wonder if maybe that was a tool he used to kind of punch through some of that possessiveness, right?
Yes. So part of what's coming to mind as you're sharing, I didn't know that about him, but again, we're looking at the lines that the types have. So 5 has a connection to 7 and a connection to 8. And so when I hear that kind of playfulness coming out, what I think of is Einstein leaning into that 7, right? Kind of moving to that place of like playfulness and being able to kind of share and this spontaneity and kind of like living into that side. Like when the 5 is in a healthy place living towards that, there is more of a freedom to kind of share and to be comfortable and to be themselves.
Makes sense.
So yeah, that's a great illustration.
Nice. Yeah, I'm glad I placed that too, because I don't think it was recordings.
It would have been in German, bro.
Yeah, it really would have. Yeah, so it was some translated writings. That's what it was. And read a biography, I think, a while back too, but there was a modern gosh, my reading selection's a little tacky sometimes, but I was reading a modern lit book, and he had there was an article from him, and I just thought to myself, he's like really playful in this, super serious, and then all of a sudden like comes up for this breath of air that just kind of grabs you and then pulls you back down into the depth of what he's actually talking about. So he was a great philosopher too. So he kind of dabbled in all of that stuff.
Yeah, that, and again, you're speaking, I think the 5, there's just an ability to understand and to delve deep, that when they're at a place that they're able to do that and then open themselves up and share that, with the world around them. Like these can be the most brilliant people, right? They can be your Einsteins of the world. And so such a gift when they're able to live awarely, right? Like, okay, there's something here that I have, and like there's a fear of incompetence at times that can hold them back. But if they can begin to realize, no, I have something to offer, and I want to step forward and share that, again, it really does, impact so many people.
Nice, man. Well, let's move on to the 6th. Let's see.
Yes, the 6th.
The loyalist.
Yes, you got it.
Yeah, the loyalist.
Who are you right now?
Yeah, look at this.
Did you drink? Josh had bulletproof coffee for lunch.
That's right.
I might have literally just ate the beans this morning. So, yeah, anyway.
That's awesome. So, for the type 6, the loyalist, we have a core fear of being helpless, lacking security and support, and then a coping belief that to be secure, you must always be on guard or alert. So for the 6s, 6s are conscientious, they're hardworking, they're loyal, they're the people that you can trust just with anything. Like they're down to earth, they're grounded, kind of your, a lot of times they're referred to as almost your like company man or woman. They're people who are very loyal to their groups. They're loyal to maybe their job or to their family or to their friends or to their political orientation, whatever it is. Like they're the people that you can count on to kind of come through for you. And they're people who spend so much time trying to really make sure that they are living and acting in a way that is kind of aligning themselves with making sure that they're bringing security to themselves and to the people around them. We find that, again, that there's this coping belief to be secure, you must always be on guard or alert. And so we find with this that there can be a little bit of anxiety, right? If there's always almost this fear of something going wrong, of something bad happening, they're constantly scanning the horizon for what could go wrong. And so with this, obviously, again, comes a little bit of anxiety.
Yeah, sure.
But what it also does, too, is it provides them with an ability to be amazing troubleshooters, right? Sure. You present a plan, you present something that's going to happen, they're going to be able to look at it and be like, okay, that could happen or this could happen, and really help you think through. And a lot of times, when 6s are doing this, they're not trying to be, pessimistic or negative. They're really trying to help because they want this, whatever is being presented, to be good, right? And to be whole and to be safe. Because this safety and security is so important to them. And if they're loyal to you, they want that to be good for you as well.
Yes. Yeah, I think, I don't know Leah's type. Leah's a counselor at the office. I don't know Leah's type specifically, and I wouldn't try and type her, but that's something that she's actually been for our practice at numerous times, like the sort of, have you considered this, have you considered this, and have you considered this? And I know that Leah's been an incredibly loyal friend to me and also an incredibly loyal coworker. I think she balances it pretty well most of the time. So I totally just immediately thought of her, right?
Yeah, and we've actually talked, and the type 6 is what resonates with her most. So I really feel like she does such a great job of really embodying so much of this, right? Yeah. And again, the way it adds so much like value. This person has your back. You know that they're going to be thinking through and really trying to make sure that things are taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We find with this, obviously, these gifts that they have to offer, there is a vice. And what that vice is fear. And this is, again, a fear of what could happen. Fear of the unknown. Fear of all the possibilities. And so what can happen when this fear is kind of able to run freely in them is it can keep them from being able to be present. Sure. Now, each of the types has trouble with being present, right? Because they can get caught up in the default reactions and they're not present themselves. But for the 6, what this looks like is they're so focused on the possibilities, so focused on the future and securing that they're not even able to enjoy the present, right? They're not able to enjoy a nice evening because of maybe the things that could go wrong that they need to secure against. And so this fear can almost hold them captive at times and not allow them to kind of live in a way that is more free. And I do want to highlight something that can show up with this fear. So the fear is the vice. 6s a lot of times can be harder to kind of type because we find that this fear also, there's a place within this fear that it shows up as self-doubt for the 6. And so what can be a very common occurrence for a type 6 is to be like, okay, I've thought through this. This is it. This is what we're going to do. We got it. We're good. And then there's this moment of crisis that's like, but what about this, right? And then they begin to kind of like toil with this, and then they can almost be internally back and forth because there's this kind of fear of what if I make the wrong decision, right? What if something bad happens? And so they can look to their authorities to kind of like really offer guidance and kind of security for them, because at times it's harder for them to know what that is for them.
Sure.
And so that fear again can show up as that self-doubt.
Gotcha.
But when they're living in a healthy space, they're able to recognize and trust their own judgment, because so many sixes I know, they have such a solid foundation when they're in a healthy place, where they're able to be rock solid supports that people turn to and they trust, because they know that they're going to make a good decision that's good for everyone in the whole. They're not self-seeking and bringing things on. And when they're able to get a glimpse of that goodness inside of them and be able to trust that, they're able to live out of that in such a way that inspires so much confidence and like good in the people around them. And so really when the six is limited, this loyalist can really move forward in a way that brings value to all.
Right on, man. Well, Wes, I think this is a good spot to take a break. So we're going to hit pause on the recording, take a little break, grab some more water. I'm out of it. You're out of it. Andrew's been out of it. So
that's why I'm not talking so much. I'm drinking all this water.
Yeah, we're gonna take a breather. We'll be right back to talk about my personal favorite, the 7, the enthusiast. I know that one, and I'm pumped to hear what you have to say, and I'll hopefully learn a little something about myself. So we'll be right back with you guys. All right, and we're back, folks. Sorry for the brief intermission there. I promise we took full advantage of it and used it appropriately. So, Wes, fill us in on the enthusiast.
Yes, type 7, the enthusiast. So we have a core fear of being trapped in pain and restricted. And then a coping belief. To be happy, you must have options and not be restricted. So we have, with type 7, we find that they are optimistic.
Come on.
Enthusiastic, energetic, quick-minded. These are big idea people. These are people who, they see the world and they see it as almost like the world is their oyster. They're yeah, that's the word, right? Yeah. And they just want to live it to the fullest. They want to experience everything kind of the world has. And so they're people who are, a lot of times, are always on the go. There's always something that's kind of captures their attention that they're trying to move towards. And we find with them as well that there's a lot of mental activity going on. There's a lot in their mind. It's very busy, and they're able to kind of combine strands of different streams and form kind of a fluid picture. And they want to go and kind of enjoy life and all that it has, and they also want to bring people with them, right? To kind of to share in all that life has. And so these are things that are very important to them. They're people as well with this. So we kind of look at this, coping belief to be, you must have options and not be restricted. Because having, seeing the world through this lens, seeing it as something that they want to kind of explore and to live into, being restricted or having limited options feels very threatening to them. Don't take away my freedom. Don't take away my ability to kind of do what I want to do, and that can be something that's very threatening to them. Which then leads us to part of what they want to avoid, which is this pain, right? This pain and restriction in options. Options for a type 7 is something that they love, that they thrive off of. I want to kind of have different options and be able to choose what I want to do and how I want to kind of go about it.
Sure.
And when you begin to limit these, it feels like, okay, something bad is about to happen. And so we find with this type, when we get to the vice, that the vice is gluttony. And this is not how we typically think about gluttony as far as food, although it can be that at times. It's more of a gluttony of, I want all the good in life. Give me all the good, all the best of everything, and the options, and experience everything. But let's maybe hold off on the bad, right? I don't really want the bad. I don't want limitation. I don't want pain or suffering or anything. And obviously, we all have a little bit of this in us. But for the 7, this is kind of something they feel very innately, and it's kind of almost instinctual to move away from in some way. And why these options are so important to them. And we find kind of what can be ironic at times for the type 7 is that while they want to experience life at the fullest, there is a part of life that they're avoiding, right? There's a part of life and reality, which is this kind of painful side that they want to get away from. And we can see reframing and rationalizing to kind of get away from it, kind of a method they use to kind of stay away. But they're still missing out on on the beauty and the gifts that this part of life has to bring. And when they're moving into a healthy space, they're able to acknowledge this. They're able to see that, okay, this is a part of life, and I don't have to get away from it. And instead, I can be present to it, be present to what is being birthed in the death, what's being birthed in the painful experiences, and the way that kind of impacts their life moving forward. And so this is kind of a little bit of the type 7.
Sure. Yeah, I have so many, all the things to say about that, right? I just kind of relate to so many of those. We'll kind of save it for our experiential part, but I will speak to this aspect of suffering that you're talking about, and probably talk about it again, right? I feel like that's been a personal journey that has had its peaks and valleys as far as me confronting suffering, right? But I would say in the last few years particularly, I've really, really moved into understanding that suffering is something that is universal and actually one of the greatest connecting strands of history and present day. And so to accept and be a part of suffering is actually to accept humanity and be a part of it, right? And so again, I have a lot I could say on that, and a lot of people that I could attribute that sort of growth to as well. That was not birthed within me, but of course that pushed me towards existential psychology too, right? Which sort of immersed in and practice on a regular basis with my clients, even these 4 fundamental fears that we all avoid, isolation, death, and all those fun things, and I mean fun as in 7 fun.
I was going to say, right,
Yeah.
right, the things you would want to avoid, right? But you've almost been like pushed into and see so much of the value and depth of those things.
Sure. But yeah, well, that's a great one. Andrew, as a friend of mine, is there anything you want to add to that?
I mean, that's pretty much spot on.
Yeah, that's wild. See, I think that's why Julie and I, actually, she was laying in bed with me. We were both reading, and I just handed her the book. I was like, hey, just read these couple of paragraphs. She just started dying laughing, right? She's like, oh my God, like, this person must have been married to you at some point in time. But anyway, well, cool. Well, that's a great overview of that. And yeah, why don't we jump to 8, which I can't remember for the life of me.
No.
Well, let me think. It's like the overlord in the workplace. It's the
personality.
Yeah, that. You're gonna have to give it to me.
Here it is. Type 8, the challenge. Yes. So for type 8, we find that there's a core fear of being powerless or controlled, and then a coping belief that to protect yourself, you must be strong and in control. So for type 8, we find that these are kind of the assertive, the kind of powerful types. That these are the people who just kind of come in and they mean business, right? They can charge ahead, they can make things happen, and they want to kind of challenge the world around them. They have a kind of a big, kind of powerful energy that they want to bring to it, and they're able to honestly do and overcome in ways that a lot of people just can't, because there is just this drive like internally in them. And we find with them that there's a strong sense of justice, and they want things to be just and fair, and they're typically looking out for the underdog. They want to kind of stand up for them in a way and be protective of their people. But we can find at times, though, that this kind of need for being powerful and pushing ahead, underneath it can be this kind of fear of being controlled. And so kind of how type 8 can a lot of times feel is, instead of me being controlled and living out of that, I'll just take control, right? Well, if I'm in control, nothing bad can happen. And so this can be a temptation that can show up for this type to kind of take control of situations and make it be what they want it to be. And really, it's kind of this protective factor for them. And so what this kind of leads to is the vice for this type, which is lust. And again, not how we typically think of it as far as sexually, but really more of a lust for intensity, and at times for control. And what this looks like is there is just a deep kind of need in the type 8 for intensity, for things to push against, for like something that they're kind of championing. And if they are living into that, they almost feel like, I need to be connected to this. And if things are more kind of like mellow or calm, it's almost that the type 8 can get antsy because they want to again challenge something. These are a lot of times you can find a kind of your all or nothing type of people. If I'm in, I'm all in. I'm going to kind of make it happen. And so this kind of lust is for that intensity and also the control, right? If I'm in control, if I'm the one who kind of is making it happen, then nothing bad will happen. I won't be controlled. I won't be powerless or taken advantage of. And so this can kind of really kind of hold them back in a lot of ways in their relationships in life. At their healthiest, though, 8s embody this powerful energy, and they're directing it towards some aim that really is trying to bring about so much good in the world and to the people around them. They can have big hearts that really are trying to champion the cause of others. And when they're living into that health right there, they can do so much to really kind of live into that.
Yeah, it's almost like they have to be aware of how they're using their assertiveness, right? I guess assertiveness would be a really natural skill for an 8, but kind of have to keep an eye and a bead on how that's being utilized. Right?
Yes, I would say 8s for sure, they can really channel that assertiveness. And what they have to watch for, to your point, is that assertiveness turning into aggression, right? There can be a fine line between that, and if the 8's not aware, they can be aggressive when they're trying to be assertive. And so being able to recognize these things in them allows them to know how to move forward in the world. I think 8s are another type, to your point about 4s, that can get a bad rap a lot of times. People are going to be like, oh, like I've had bad experience with 8s or this or that, right? But I think for me, it really kind of hits on certain stereotypes of the type that aren't getting at what's actually going underneath the type, and also what the 8, when they're living an aware life, can really get to.
Sure.
What I always think of when I think of an 8 is Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa is kind of by most people typed as an 8, which you'd never think, right? Like she's this caring person, but if you actually read about her life, we find that she was someone who kind of had an edge to her. She kind of had this force, and like to live the life of impact that she lived, there had to have been something that was pushing her and driving her.
Sure,
and
she fiery woman.
Yes, exactly. And so that's what I always think of. Like, 8s don't have to be just these dominant people who are just trying to take advantage. No, there can be so much good that comes from an 8 who's living consciously and aware of how these things are showing up.
Nice. I would have always thought she was a 2.
Yes.
I feel like everybody would probably go.
And see, that's the thing is I think a lot of people typically think that. I mean, I would normally think that too. And what's interesting, if we're talking about the lines again, we find that 8 has a line of connection to 2. And so when we think about Mother Teresa, she was probably leaning heavily into that too, and drawing upon that big heart. I've heard a word used for 8s that in their healthiest, what they look like, it's magnanimous hearts, these just wide open hearts that just want to kind of like swallow people into it and like push forward like so much good. And like I think 8s, there's that space inside of them, and if they're able to kind of get in touch with that and be able to break down some of those walls, they can really live in a way that is wholehearted while also like pushing forward so much good.
Sure.
That describes me perfectly.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh man, that's a great overview of the 8, and yeah, I mean you're right. My I thought to myself, the overlord of the office, right? That's what I said. That's the stereotype of the 8, right? But the way you just broke that down sort of dissolves that stereotype. Now, granted, you can, I guess, become that if you're not doing that. Doing that mindfulness and catching and seeing where your health and stress levels are at, right? You can totally bend in that direction. But it sounds like there's actually a lot of buffer room before you get there, the way you just described that. So,
yeah, no, definitely. I think it's hard because, especially as it's gotten more popular, there's people who kind of learn a little about the Enneagram and then they kind of share it with a lot of people, which isn't bad. But that's what happens is these stereotypes, happen, right? And then these kind of become our ideas of the type. And like, while some of those, the overlord of the workplace, while that can happen at times with that definitely can. We don't want to minimize or say that that's not a reality that happens for 8s. We don't want that to be the way that we kind of overall think of them.
Sure.
We want to recognize that while this is, yes, a reality, there's also this corresponding healthy place that allows them to, let's say in the workplace, right, lead effectively in a way that really is kind of like protecting and taking care of their team.
Sure.
Like that opposite kind of corollary existence is available in the workplace for an 8 as well. And so definitely want to be able to kind of have it be both sides. So,
sure. Well, let's talk about the old peacemaker.
Yes.
Number 9.
Yes.
I do know that one.
That's right.
That's for sure.
So we have the core fear of the type 9 is being dismissed or not worth keeping. So then they have a coping belief: to have belonging, you must blend in and go with the flow. So for the type 9s, we find that they are typically peaceful, open-minded, empathetic. They're able to see all sides of different things, and they want kind of peace and calm to kind of be in their environment. We find with them that they're typically good mediators, and there's this empathy that allows them to be able to kind of connect with others. We find with this kind of peacefulness that peace is a really driving force, and this is peace not only internally but externally. So internally, that's kind of feeling peace within themselves, and I want to be kind of peace and calm and relaxed, but also I want peace in my environment. I don't want conflict. I don't want things to be just uneasy or rough, and so I want things to be kind of calm and peaceful, and so this drives a lot of their life. And what can happen, though, is part of how the type 9 can get by is I don't want to maybe ruffle feathers. I don't want to kind of like rock the boat. And so it's almost easier for me to just kind of go along with what other people are wanting or what other people are asserting. And so they can just kind of go along. They can kind of almost float in a way with whatever group of people they're a part of, kind of. And at times it can feel like almost the path of least resistance for them, because it's kind of like, this is good. I'm pretty easygoing. It's fine. It's good. I'll just kind of do whatever. Yeah. What happens, though, is when your default is doing that, is you can become more and more disconnected from yourself, more and more disconnected from, well, what do I actually think? Or what do I actually feel? Or how do I want to kind of go about living my life? Like, where do I stand on this? Yes. That can be something that can be a little bit harder for them to be connected to. I've heard 9s describe that when you kind of ask those questions and ask them to kind of sink into that, it's like almost a haze sets in that it makes it hard for them to even kind of put words to it, because they're so used to kind of just like almost merging with the people around them. And so for the type 9, this is something that they kind of naturally do. And with this, right, there can bring so much good because they're able to kind of see both sides, bring people together. But again, there is this disconnection that can come to themselves, which leads to our vice. And the vice for type 9 is sloth. And sloth, what this looks like, just like there's a lot of these kind of vices that don't match our typical opinion of what they are. What sloth looks like is kind of a self-forgetting. And this is basically a falling asleep to themselves. 9's focus of attention is on the external environment and other people's kind of needs. And so they'll naturally kind of move in and kind of trying to keep the peace around them. But it's harder for them to pay attention to, again, what's going on inside. Where do I stand? What do I feel? What do I think? And so this sloth is more of a sloth towards their own priorities, towards their own goals, towards their own things that make them come alive. And as they fall asleep to themselves, it can be hard to kind of live out of that. That being said, when they're in a healthy place, then they're connected to these things that make them tick. When they're connected to their values and to their emotions and their belief systems, they're able to kind of access those in a way that they can live robustly out of those while still being this peaceful mediating presence to the world around them. They're able to kind of be a presence that doesn't kind of avoid conflict to kind of keep the peace, but instead is able to move into the conflict to mediate and to bring that peacefulness to bear on the world around them.
Yeah. I like it.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, just kind of staring at Andrew right now. That last part, that ability to step into the conflict, see both sides, and not bend your own opinion and all of it, but to bring all three of those together. It's like, well, I'm thinking this, you're thinking this, you're thinking this. Like, let's look at ways to actually bring this together, problem solve it, right? I'd say that's a strength of yours.
Thanks,
Andrew.
No, I was just thinking it really helps with family counseling. Part of family counseling is to obviously not be biased and everyone is equal in the room. But we're human, and so it's easy to point out certain personalities and and lean more towards one or the other person. But I definitely think I'm able to kind of negate that and really kind of see everybody as equals and that kind of thing in those contexts. So.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily a natural tendency kind of for that. It'd be one thing to see and to empathize. It's another thing to be able to step into those spaces like you're able to do and then mediate and speak to the conflict. Because a lot of times for 9s, it's almost a conflict avoidance, right? Like, I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to step away, or I'm not going to address things that need to be addressed. And in a family counseling session, there's no way you could do that, right? Like, you will get steamrolled. And so, like, you have like, had to learn the ability to step into those spaces and make that happen. Exactly, right.
Yeah. Well, that's really... That's interesting. I mean, it may be a great segue for us to talk a little bit about our personal experiences, right? And I wonder the extent to which our field, like being therapists, has actually forced us all to grow in these types, right? I could name a bunch of different ways that's the case for myself, but I wonder, like how do you see that the field has helped you grow, Wes or Andrew? Like, what do you feel like the field has pushed in you to be a healthier type, or to be a more self-actualized type? I don't even know if that's Enneagram terminology, right? I'm integrating I'm integrating psych languages, but what do you guys think?
So I became a group therapist at one point, right? Which, I mean, to being a 9, I mean, that you would think that like group therapy would be something that I would avoid, and historically, that's absolutely something I would avoid. I changed my major one time because they told me that I was going to have to do public speaking. Even doing this in particular is a stretch for me. I think everybody knows I stumble a little bit, but anyway, but yeah, in being immersed in conflict, and specifically I think working with addiction in a group setting, and now kind of finding a niche and working with couples, and there's so much conflict that's brought into the room. I think I've had to get very comfortable within conflict and non-judgment, and trying to navigate some of those more complicated situations that I feel like, typically someone with the 9 personality type, do you label it personality types?
Yeah, that would
those were like I said, those were the types of scenarios where in years past I would have absolutely avoided those scenarios, where now it's, just coming to work in itself is pretty comfortable. It just kind of became I don't know that I even really consider it or think about it anymore. So
what comes to mind for me is what you said, the bicep curl, right?
Right.
You're almost in this profession forced to step into this place that at one point might have been uncomfortable, but you've almost been forced to, and as you've been forced to, it's helped you to grow in these ways, right? So now it isn't something that you think about, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think about, for even just the field of therapy in general and us as therapists, I know therapists, I think, for just about every type, and I think it's hard not to be in this space with people every day and walking with them in their journeys and their struggles, for it not to work on you in a certain way that forces you to be introspective and to see how kind of similar or corollary things are showing up for you. And I definitely see that in myself as well. I'm a type 3, had a journey, thought I was a type 9 for a little bit, which is, for all you people who, mistype at first, that's a very normal thing. But I think part of actually my role as a therapist was part of that. As a 3, there is this kind of self-deceit at times, right? And so I think I almost internalized the role of a therapist, right? That kind of this peaceful, this kind of calming presence for people, and didn't realize the kind of the internal workings of what was going on. And it was helpful for me, people coming alongside me and helping me begin to see these parts of myself. And they say that for the 3, there definitely is more of an energy and kind of an excitement that's being brought. And I definitely now can recognize in myself there's a different energy in a 3 as opposed to kind of a 9. And so for me, what that's done is opened up an allowance for me to kind of be who I am in a way that is able to kind of see the potential and see that in other people, and hope to bring that forth, right? And what that does is, I think for me as a 3 anyway, and the ways it's helped me grow is, I think partly it's the empathy factor, right? It's being able to connect to myself. 3s can be disconnected from themselves, and in the counseling room, being able to connect to myself, and as I'm hearing the stories and the experience of others, kind of it helps me attune to myself as I'm attuning to them, right? As I'm trying to be for them and to help them wherever they're at in their journey. It's something that's experiencing us both being present together. And what that does is it then can help me move into my spaces at home, right? And the spaces in my relationships where I'm able to stay connected to myself. And this isn't something I'm just like a pro at now, right? It's something I still have to constantly struggle with trying to embody. But being in the counseling space, at least for me, is that repetition, right? It's kind of putting me in a place where I constantly have to be mindful of these things so that I can allow kind of the work that needs to be done in me to be done. And I'm so grateful to be in a space that allows that process to begin to happen.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I connect with several of the things that you guys just mentioned, and with the 7, the primary fear being of pain or suffering, right? It's I mean, that is the therapy office, or at least my therapy office that's what I'm stepping into on an hourly basis, right? I'm stepping into suffering, stepping into pain. My target clientele are severe and reoccurring depression, chronic illnesses, like things, death, severe childhood trauma, severe adult trauma. Like, that's what I enjoy doing therapy with. That's what I enjoy helping people go through. And so obviously that is a challenge to this avoidance of pain, because I'm willfully stepping into it with another person, right? And then I also have to contend with that on sometimes a minute by minute basis, because I think as a 7, there's a tendency sometimes to immediately look to a silver lining, or immediately look to something that's positive to try and counter this negative, like the comma but have you thought about, right? It's like no, I do offer a fair amount of that. I tell my clients, it's like there's a pit, and I know you're in this pit of suffering, right? And I will put one foot in it with you, and half my body is there, and I am there, but one of us has to keep a foot out, right? And that's sort of the hope I think that a 7 can really bring into the field, is that approach of there is either an end to this, or there is another way to look at it that's also helpful, right? But man, you talk about challenging. I've spent a good amount of time at this point considering death. I was on a hike recently, and I was in the car with my parents. It was a benefit for them, and they were kind of asking me how therapy was going and how my personal inner workings were going, and I was like, well, I've come up with this catchphrase, and they're like, yeah. I was like, yeah, we're all violently hurling towards an imminent death. And my mom turned around and looked at me and was like, what? And my dad was like, geez, Josh, that's depressing. I was like, but that's what I've been sitting with, It's like death is imminent, but at the same time, understanding that death is imminent and that it will happen to you allows you to have this sort of freedom to experience each moment that you're given, which is the positive of the 7. It's embracing the suffering and the death actually allows you to enjoy things more fully, because you realize they're finite, rather than just moving from thing to thing to thing to thing, avoiding all of your pain. Which for me on the journey, understanding that avoiding the pain was an actual thing. I didn't have words for it until the Enneagram, actually. And I also discovered as a 7, right, you have to be careful with substances, especially uppers, right? Everything from caffeine to cocaine, but I'm not touching cocaine, so that's good. But you do have to kind of be aware of what you're putting into your body, even because of that inclination to just make the experience more intense, right? Better, the best experience, or turn this thing into awesomeness or sheer awesomeness and see the potential for it, right?
Live it to the fullest, right?
Yeah, living it
this
to the
fullest. This can help me kind of get that, then I want that, yeah.
But what's interesting is death doesn't kill you, death makes you live. It's a really cool maxim for a 7, for me to realize, and I think therapy has opened my eyes to that, is that true living to the fullest is an acknowledgement that you will die, and that there is suffering, and that is a reason to actually enjoy things for what they are, instead of trying to enhance them, right? That's kind of been my journey with it. It's they are good as they are, right? And it's a beautiful way to live, and I think that's why there were even some of the 4 things that I connected with there. But really, I know I'm talking a bunch, but I'm super excited about this. So but But when I'm plugged into the more healthy parts of the 1 and 5, it's interesting how they all interchange with each other, because what'll happen is like this study of death and suffering, I actually took it on as a 5 would. And the discipline of the 1 sort of informed me as far as the moral structure of it. Like, this is a moral discussion. It's not just head knowledge. And my inner 7 was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm enjoying my breathing more, right? Guys, like, this is working, right? We're all working together, right? But I guess the downside of that too is like, I can be, especially when I'm getting a new project underway, or getting into a new research study. I think I bend in that unhealthy 5 direction sometimes when I'm stressed, where I just like I get possessive over it, right? It's like, nope, like it's struck me as paranoid a couple of times too, which is really interesting. Like, when that happens and I'm like, oh, that's weird, that's not typically the case, but I do tend to sort of bend in that direction where I get possessive, and for me to be possessive, that's a problem on multiple playing fields, so it gets addressed really quickly. But yeah, I just rambled a bunch there, sorry. That's kind of how the field has helped me though, and also just some of my own journey as a 7.
No, I think that's it, right? You mentioned like the 1 and the 5, right? And like
yes.
At different points, especially in your healthiest, being able to really live into both aspects of that, and it combining, right? Because when I think of a 5, I think of being able to really dive deep into the understanding and the knowledge, but then moving to that 1, being connected to what you value,
yes.
what is right, and like being able to take steps towards that, right?
Yes.
So it's almost combining those two. In a 7, that can be harder to kind of land and then follow through. You combining that 7 and the 1, when you're leaning in a healthy way to both of them, yes. It really does open up the door for so much.
Yes, I tell you what, having a wife who's a 1 too helps, right? Not a 1 2, but a 1, a 1 also. That definitely helps balance out some of that 7 tendency.
For sure.
Yeah.
There's definitely quite a bit of 7-1 couples that I know as well. Pretty common pairing. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I love her. That's for sure. I love the challenge that she brings me as well. It's helpful, like 100% of the time, actually. So anyway, well, cool. So I guess we could wrap up from there, or I mean, we can continue to kind of explore these stories. Wes, I don't know what your time is looking like, but I know you're trained in the more narrative part of Enneagram stuff. And hearing these things from Andrew and I, are any sort of like narrative questions pop up for you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think not off. If I'd been thinking more in the moment, probably
Gotcha.
taken kind of more advantage of that. Because part of what I love about the narrative tradition, and one of the main teaching tools for the narrative Enneagram, is the use of panels. And what panels are is typically 2 to 3 to 4 people of the same type. And so like at a workshop or whatnot, they would, all be together, and then what I would do as kind of a trained teacher is I would kind of ask them questions about their experiences, whatever number they are. And as they share their story, as they share their experience, I'm kind of going to be following up with certain questions and pressing certain areas and allowing them to kind of share what's going on inside. Gotcha. And it's so impactful because we really can get at the inner workings of like what's going on.
Gotcha.
And I've heard so many stories from different numbers that have just like, oh man, they've changed the game, honestly, in the ways that I view these numbers, because of the vulnerability and the ways that they're able to kind of really open themselves up. It's been an incredible gift to me. And I know for me, being in those spaces and really wanting to kind of cultivate that safety is important to me. As well as being able to give people the opportunity to, one, share their story and to feel seen and heard in a way, but then also the gift that is to other people. When I hear someone share from their heart how these things show up, it's hard for me not to be affected. And that's what really makes this come alive. This is not, it can be just a theory that we kind of talk about and cool, but when it's kind of spoken and taught in the form of hearing people's stories, it goes much deeper. And so it's definitely impacted me.
Well, right on. So yeah, me asking you if you have any narrative questions, I didn't realize it requires some
full panel.
Yeah, like some full panel and dialogue. Right? Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Yeah,
but it's good. It's good to hear what the narrative training in Enneagram actually is, and kind of how you approach that. So, still good stuff. Good stuff, man. Well, Wes, I learned a ton tonight. Thanks so much for coming out to the podcast, man. Again, Wes is what is your title at Enneagram Chattanooga?
Founder, coach.
Okay, founder and coach of Enneagram Chattanooga. You guys can check him out online. We'll put the links in the description below the podcast. You'll find it on our website. We'll probably put a little blog post out about this as well on the website with some helpful links. I'm sure it would be helpful to have maybe some resources from Wes, whether there's some websites you could think of, some book resources. I mean,
for sure.
Maybe we can go ahead and put that all in a blog and follow this up as well, so you guys have some good resources. But man, thanks again for your time, Wes, and best of luck with the Enneagram Chattanooga venture. We hope that's successful. Hopefully this leads a few people your way as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love this stuff. It's impacted me so much, and so anytime I get the opportunity to be able to share this, it really is a blessing. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, Andrew and Josh signing off. We'll check you next time. Not really sure what's coming down the pipe as far as another podcast, but we will definitely have one for you sooner rather than later. All right. Thanks, guys.
Toodles.
Nice. You have been listening to The Counselor's Chair, sponsored by Traverse Counseling Services. For more information, visit our website at www.traversecounselingservices.com or email us at contact@infotraverse.com. Thank you again for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time. This podcast was recorded and produced by Josh Zello.